Well, good morning. It is 11 o'clock a.m. Thank you for joining the Virginia Opioid Abatement Authority for our most recent installment of the Abatement Academy. My name is Tony McDowell. I'm the Executive Director for the OAA, and I'd like to welcome you to this installment of the Academy. As many of you may already know, the Abatement Academy is a series of webinars that present best practices in opioid and substance use abatement strategies in Virginia. And it highlights efforts that are being funded with opioid settlement funds across the Commonwealth. Our speakers generously give their time and expertise to present these sessions voluntarily. Like all Abatement Academy webinars, today's session is being recorded. Both the recording and the presentation itself will be uploaded to the OAA website, and an email will be sent out to everyone and anyone who registered so that they can receive a link to receive the recording and the presentation. If you have any questions or comments during this session, please type them into the Q&A feature, or if you don't have access to the Q&A feature, type it into the chat, and I'll be watching those and we'll be able to put those questions forward to our speaker. I'm going to act as the moderator, and I may ask the questions during our speaker's presentation, or I may hold them until the end, depending on the type of question and that type of thing. So today's presentation is going to tell the story about how the city of Richmond has used opioid settlement funds to deploy harm reduction vending machines, including a kind of a tale of the different types of challenges and issues that the city encountered during this process and how those challenges were overcome successfully, and to finally talk about the outcomes that the city is seeing from this strategy of delivering naloxone and other harm reduction supplies to its at-risk portions of the community. Our presenter this morning is Mr. Jason Alley. Jason is a person who is in long-term recovery from substance use disorder and from the restaurant industry. So Jason, I don't know if that means that you're in recovery from the restaurant industry, but he does have 35 years of experience working in kitchens and as the owner of restaurants for 20 of those years. He recently found himself in the position of policy advisor for the opioid crisis response in his adopted hometown of Richmond, Virginia. Jason's wife of 27 years, Mercedes Shum, is a theater set designer and clearly a patient person. They have 4 wonderful children together and are always grateful when everyone is in the same place. Jason is a peer recovery specialist active in the Richmond chapter of Ben's Friends, and I'll put the website for that in the chat in a moment. And he still finds time to play the drums occasionally. This year, Jason was accepted to the Hazelden Betty Ford Graduate School for Addiction Studies and has begun working towards his master's degree in addiction counseling. With that as an introduction, I will now turn the floor over to Jason to begin the session.
Thanks, Tony. Appreciate that intro. And I would say it's good to see everybody, but with it being a webinar, I can't actually see who's here. But thank you all who are attending. Seems like we have a pretty good turnout for this. Yeah, so my little background on me. So my name is Jason Alley. I owned restaurants in the city and throughout the Commonwealth for about 20 years. I found recovery while still working in the restaurant industry. And, you hear stories about how recovery changes lives. It 100% has changed my life. I'm still with my lovely wife and family, which probably wouldn't have been the case. And I've developed such a robust community of friends, coworkers, allies in the recovery community. It's just been an incredible journey. So I had been working for the city for a couple of years and was able to transfer into this position with the opioid coordination and response. And it's honestly been the privilege of a lifetime. I couldn't imagine work that I would be more proud of. Can't imagine a time in the city where I'd be more honored to be doing this work. We have tremendous support for these endeavors, both from the mayor's office, all the city council offices. Everybody is super in support. which is amazing. I wasn't totally sure that that was going to be the case. But really, one of the greatest privileges and joys of doing this work is the amount of time I get to spend working with community partners. Um, you know, we don't do direct services here. So I know a lot of municipalities and counties are using this money through their CSB or other sort of public health existing structures. Um, we thought at the city that it was important for us to manage these funds and really pull together as many partners as possible to make sure that the work we're doing extends in the community in a way that's really valuable and helps. So we partner with tons of people through our Richmond Opioid Task Force, and we go to them for suggestions, for direction, for advice, for subject matter expertise, and it's a really robust group. Around 50 different agencies are represented at any given point. Um, so it's just been incredible. And it was through that work that this harm reduction vending machine project got started. So on the Richmond Opioid Task Force, we have subcommittees. We have a diversion subcommittee, so a criminal justice involved subcommittee that does work on that end. We have treatment and recovery as a subcommittee. We have prevention as a subcommittee, and then we have harm reduction. Um, so in that harm reduction subcommittee, the crew over at Health Brigade, for those of you guys who aren't familiar with Richmond's vast array of public health partners, Health Brigade originally was called the Fan Free Clinic. It's been around for decades. And part of what they do is comprehensive harm reduction. That's what that CHR stands for. So comprehensive harm reduction recognized by the state. They do outreach, they do needle exchange, they do distribution of naloxone and test strips and other harm reduction items like wound care kits that have been specifically sort of designed for the awful wounds we're seeing from the xylazine in the community. They worked really hard with a wound care doctor to develop this kit that they could deploy. um, Shoes, socks, snacks. Without stability, safety and recovery is really challenging. And recovery is not the end goal for harm reduction, but there are a lot of people who are in recovery who have their own personal recovery journey that are involved with Health Brigade. So if somebody is ready to hear that message, they're able to make the connections. So back to the harm reduction vending machines. So before I got into this position, Health Brigade had already been exposed to these harm reduction vending machines in other communities. I think closest to us is in DC, but there's a whole nationwide coalition of people who have deployed these machines. So they started looking at these and seeing how we could go about deploying them. When I came into this position, as well as my former supervisor, Mike Fatula, um, we started attending these task force meetings. And this was one of the first things that was brought to our attention is, hey, Colin and Zico from Health Brigade are like, we've been working on this. This is something that we think is extremely valuable. We know that harm reduction works. How do we go about doing this through OAA funds? So I was very, very excited by this. It seemed like such an amazing thing to do and a really a very strong case use for opioid abatement funds. So the next thing that we did was go ahead and do the application for individual distribution grant to get these things stood up. So we ended up going through IDS, which is Intelligent Dispensing Solutions. They came back pretty much, if not the only people out there doing it, certainly top of the game. We got recommendations for them from several other partners around the country. But IDS, and there is a link to their website at the end of the presentation. IDS does these harm reduction vending machines as a standalone. It's not a retrofitting some other machine. They're climate controlled, so you don't have to worry about spiking temperatures with the naloxone that's inside. Um, they're digital. They have, we got outdoor units. So they have cell phones to send data out as opposed to having to have a hardwired Ethernet connection. So they were 100% like the clear partner for this. We went through the discussion of, how are we going to actually procure the naloxone. So we had an MOU with VDH, and then we were turned on to Patagus, and Patagus makes naloxone, and they do a lot of partnering with individual localities. So we were able to save a bunch of money by going with Patagus. We haven't gone back and looked at what the cost would be through VDH again, but when we go through our next purchasing round, we'll absolutely be looking at them as well. But we saved a bunch of money by going with Patagus, which is great. So, we bought 20 some $1,000s worth of naloxone from them. And then we had to figure out what were the other items. We know that harm reduction is not just naloxone. It's test strips, but also how do we make sure that we're sort of caring for our most vulnerable populations? One of the big pushes with harm reduction is that we're treating people with dignity, with love, and respect. It's not coming from a preachy sort of standpoint. We're not trying to convince people of anything. We just want to meet them with their needs as best we can. So we looked at what do people need and what can we afford, and also stock of the machines. So we just went through Amazon for the first round of stuff. And so we got sanitizing hand and face wipes for people. We knew that was a huge need. And again, a lot of this information coming from our partners at Health Brigade. We knew naloxone and test strips for sure, and that was going to be the push of it. But we also decided that menstrual pads, menstrual care products would be a really important thing to have in there. We wanted to do a more robust wound care kit, which we're actually looking into for the next round of stocking. But with this initial one, we just went with a small, cheap little first aid box. It didn't come with alcohol swabs or triple antibiotic cream. So we bought those separately and packed them together. And we added a toothbrush and toothpaste because, again, these are things that people need and can use. So we just, ordered all that from Amazon. So now we've got our stuff together. We know who we're getting our machines from. We know who we're getting our items from, the product. So then we had to do an internal brand development. The machine's part of the purchase price is a wrap. So you can, brand the machines however you would like. And we have a great design team here in the city of Richmond. So we leaned on them to do the design work. And what they came up with was fantastic. And I think really speaks to what these things are. So speaking of what these things are, this is our machine that is functioning and distributing product in Marshall Plaza. If you're familiar with Richmond and downtown Richmond in particular, Marshall Plaza is a building that's controlled by the city. It's our building, but it's directly across the street from City Hall. It also is a block and a half away from our mass transit systems, sort of their platform for bus transfers. It's an outdoor bus transfer plaza. We had initially wanted to use that GRTC transfer plaza for a location for one of the machines. GRTC was awesome, super supportive. It was an immediate yes. And then we went into digging about how are we going to find an outlet, right? All we need is an outlet. Everything should be fine. And the transfer plaza is completely maxed out on its electrical abilities. So it would have been many dozens of thousands of dollars to pull wire just to be able to plug in this 6 amp machine. So we looked for a different location. So we went with Marshall Plaza. And part of that really is because it is still close to that transfer station. So, we know that people who still have relationships with substances ride the bus for multiple reasons. Sometimes it's just to get out of the weather, but also to get to appointments or whatever it is. So we wanted to be close and proximate to that. And that's how we end up with this location. But you can see here, it's really, really straightforward branding. That is, for those of us in the industry or people who use substances, understand that that is a naloxone or a Narcan dispenser. And here you can see all the items that are stocked in there. Probably should have made that picture a little bit bigger, but you push the button, you push 1, 2, or 3, and that functions as your employee ID, because this is set up, this machine's software is repurposed from like internal business machines where you might have something specific to a project inside the machine. We want this to be as low barrier as possible, right? Free harm reduction supplies is fantastic, but if it's cumbersome, if it's difficult, if people feel like they're being surveilled or we're trying to harvest data, that goes completely against the notion of low barrier. But we had to figure out something. So we just did 1, 2, and 3. You push that in and you can push the corresponding number for the product that you would like to have dispensed. And then it prompts you for a 5-digit zip code. We didn't pre-program the zip codes. We just left it open. So if somebody doesn't want to put in their zip code, you could put in 5 zeros and it'll still work. But part of that decision-making process was, how do we make it so that somebody can't just hit 101 18 times and deplete the whole row, right? We're totally great with people getting as much naloxone as they could possibly need. Same with test strips and the other items. But we really want them to take what they need so they can leave stuff for other people. So that was one part of it. You have to put in a zip code for every item that's dispensed, or 5 digits. And then that was one way for us to just think about how we're going to, apply what data we can to the success of the project. And it's been interesting. We'll get to that in a minute. So this is Marshall Plaza. So as you can see, it's been rocky at times. So this was the second location. This is Southside Plaza. So this is in a poorer neighborhood on the south side of the city, on the other side of the river. One of the big ideas for this place is, one, we already have offices in there, social services offices. You can come and pay utility bills, but it also is this sort of nexus of poor Black and brown neighborhoods. So a lot of our Spanish language speaking residents live kind of on this part of Southside, and we want to make sure that we're getting to them as well in a way that's valuable and makes sense. So we put the machine down and it got smashed. So a little bit of a bummer. And we understand that these things are outdoors, right? They're open to some level of vandalism or whatever. But we wanted to put this in a place that was a little tucked away, a little out of the way, people could access, and not feel maybe exposed, because there's still definitely stigma around this. So it was tucked away enough that somebody threw a rock and smashed up the window. Clearly just doing bad kid stuff, right? Just whatever. It wasn't to get items, and there's no cash. So that's a thing. But so that's been a little bit of a difficulty. And then because we don't own this building, being able to do some of the exterior, like building adjustments to get better power, has been challenging. So glass is ordered, and then that thing will get back up and going hopefully very soon. And then we have the third one to be deployed at our East End library. So in the Churchill neighborhood of Richmond. besides looking at information that Health Brigade has from their outreach efforts, we also have access to OD maps. We have access to information from our police department, looking at where we're seeing the highest concentrations of overdose. But a lot of it is actual boots on the ground experience as well. So the third one is going to be on our East End, which is another high incident rate of overdose and fatal overdose. But that one, site prep was done. It was great. We go to deliver it, and the site prep wasn't done accurately. So we had to go back and re-pour a slab, and we have to move an outlet. So, it's been bumpy. I have a good reason to believe that this next round, we've applied for 3 more machines. So those will be coming in the next fiscal year. Definitely have good reason to think that the next rollout will be a little less bumpy, but you don't know what you don't know. So we'll learn from our mistakes and from our challenges, but also fairly certain that new ones will pop up. They always do. So yeah, so that's the South Side location and the East End location. So the application process, if you guys are on this call, you've probably gone through the application process for a project of your own. So in the narrative part, luckily, this is not something that we had to really struggle to make a case for, right? That's evidence-based. There's good information around the fact that this works. It speaks to the priorities of the OAA. So luckily, this one went through really smoothly. But in that narrative, it's about having these harm reduction vending machines in high traffic, high overdose areas. And these machines have been shown to reduce fatal overdoses in the zip codes where they're located. Now, we are not going to have information like that for quite some time. But partners in DC, partners in Michigan, these are people who have said, like, we look at the outcomes in these zip codes and specifically within like a multi-block radius, and they have seen actual appreciable drops. One less overdose is a massive success, and anything more than that just speaks really to the value of this kind of harm reduction effort. So in the ask, it's not just, hey, we need money for the machines, right? We need the machines. We need the software licensing agreement, that has to be put together as well. Purchasing inventory. Are you paying outside staff, or are you doing it in-house for the restocking? Because, we'll go for a week and there's not a lot of movement, and then come back the next day and you're like, oh my gosh, wow, it was busy last night, right? So you have to have somebody who can move relatively quickly. We talked about this a little already, but those are the items that we said, this is what we want to put in the machines because we know that this is the kind of support that can be beneficial for people, right? So naloxone test strips. Right now, we just have fentanyl test strips, but since we started this process, the landscape has changed quite a bit. So the next round, we'll have nitazene test strips, and we'll have xylazine test strips as well. Wipes, menstrual products, first aid kit, toothbrush, and toothpaste. And then
Hey,
our total
Jason,
buck, yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but
Oh,
there's a
you're good.
question that came through that I think, while we're on this slide, it's a perfect time to ask it.
Mhm.
The question is, are the items that you referenced, such as the menstrual pads, toothbrushes, wound care kits, sanitizing wipes, are these allowable to be purchased under your opioid abatement authority grant funds, or do they need another funding source? And I think, Jason can certainly answer this, but as the executive director of the OAA, this is a typical question that we get. And really think of it this way: the funding we provide, and it's not, it's the funding we provide is for the program, right? The funding is for the outcome that you're trying to get to. And so the outcome here is comprehensive harm reduction that includes naloxone, but it also includes these other items. And because there's evidence to show that these are important elements of a harm reduction program, then they are an allowable use of opioid abatement funds and opioid settlement funds.
Yeah, thanks for answering that. And our sort of when we were applying for this, and our sort of mindset going through the process was, we know that opioid leads, right? Like that part of the harm reduction leads. So it's a high focus on the Naloxone, it's a high focus on test strips, fentanyl test strips, and others that'll be coming up. But yeah, to Tony's point, I mean, this is all part of caring for the whole person. Um, and the more that we care for the whole person, the better the outcomes tend to be. Um, Thanks for addressing that, Tony. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Apparently, I forgot to put in the total budget number, but what we applied for and were awarded was $147,000, 711. So about 150 grand. Um, we were able to find some cost saving measures, not just through the purchasing of the naloxone through Patagus, but also we had put in money to contract people to stock the machines, and we actually were able to shift that and do that in-house. So most of us probably just finished some of the carry forward true up. So that money just got carried forward into the next year's clump of machines. And now that we actually have them on the ground, we realize that we definitely need to have a line item in there for maintenance and repair, right? So basically $1,000 to replace the glass, including install and stuff. So not cheap, but that's okay, right? It's okay to spend money to make sure that people are getting what they need. So we had a savings. I don't remember off the top of my head, but around 30 grand, I think. And we'll be using all of that for sure over the next 2 years. So for the next phase of this, we just did the carry forward. That money adjusts into the budget that we were looking at, and that'll just continue as the machines continue to move forward.
Jason, another question has
Yeah.
popped up, and I apologize if you have this later in your presentation, but who does the restocking of the machine and what like level or type of employee does that?
Yeah. So I don't have a whole lot left on the presentation, so it'll be time for questions. So we have a group that's like in-house. They're called the ambassadors, Richmond ambassadors. So they're housed in the same department that we are in our human services portfolio, and they do a ton. Um, but one of the things that they're really focused on is being in these neighborhoods, talking with people, assisting. They do door knock campaigns. They do tons and tons of work. Um, but we thought that this would be a really great opportunity for them to have another thing to do out in the community. So we have a good percentage of our ambassadors team are Spanish language native speakers. So having them be able to go to the one on the south side and restock and maybe engage in a more authentic way with some of the clients. But so yeah, so that's just part of their sort of continuing outreach into the communities already, which is great. We're really lucky to do that. So their supervisor has access to all of the back of house stuff, the keys, the storage area, all those things. But her just below her, that sort of supervisor level will be the ones that organize the actual restocking. So, as far as level of employee, it's somebody you trust. There's no cash value to any of this stuff. There's no cash in the machines. So it's really just somebody that you can trust to go and have everything facing forward and looking good. So our internal process. So this identifying the project and apply to OAA. So most of the projects that we've done, I think really with the exception of one, they have been involved with the decision making has come at least partially, if not mostly, from the Richmond Opioid Task Force. The one that didn't come directly from them is we're funding a pilot MAT program in our city justice center. That was still addressed with them. It was brought to the table. It was discussed, that kind of thing. But it didn't necessarily sprout from the task force. But most everything does. So we, identify the project, and then you do the application process to OAA. It was a little wonky for me the first time I did it, but I'm consistently impressed. I'm not just saying this because Tony's here. consistently impressed with really kind of how easy it is to navigate, but more importantly, um, the whole team over there is so quick to respond. See my friend Miss Bridges there. She was like, I mean, the email response time is awesome. So that process is really pretty easy to navigate. So then we have to create our budget, find the locations, and site prep. And as we saw, that stuff is a little challenging. Um, so in this process, because the city of Richmond is fairly unique in how the legislation and that process works, we can't just like accept funds and move them from one place to another. So once we receive the funding from OAA, this gets presented to mayor, but the big one is city council. So for us to accept funds, to move funds, to actually execute a project, for us to distribute micro grants, any of those things, all of those steps have to go through the legislative process with council. It is not fast, which is a little bit of a bummer, but I think it gives us an opportunity. I'm trying to look at the positive side on this when I get frustrated about how much time it can take. It allows me or my partner in this to stand in front of city council and talk about the issues, to talk about the problems, to talk about the solutions, um, so that all of those members of council are informed. And it's sort of, I want to say forces, but kind of, it forces people, including ourselves, to think about the issues with the opioid crisis, with addiction crises in general. So there is definitely a benefit to that above and beyond just the sort of transparency that it creates. And then after that, it's order and deploy the machines, and that has been a hell of a process so far. But we're learning all the time. Um, I didn't include data in this presentation because it's a little wonky right now. They haven't been out long enough to have like serious data, but I'll keep reporting back to Tony, and hopefully at the end of next month, yes, end of September, we'll have 90 days of data. And I would love to be able to send that out to you guys and show you what we're actually looking at. What we know to be true so far is that most of the people who are putting in zip codes are within the downtown area. There's a couple of zip codes here. We know that naloxone is the biggest mover, followed by test strips, and then the other items. So those are the bulk. The other items are sort of a mix. But we don't have to restock them the same way that we do the others. So it's working, right? It's doing what we want to see, which is life-saving medications deployed to people who need it, and then this, option to hopefully prevent an unwanted overdose with the test strips. It's been pretty exciting so far. So the next screen is just web links so that you guys have it when you get this presentation. This is to the IDS vending. Really easy to work with, super responsive, great machines. This is the link to Patagus, and they do have lots of MOUs and contracts with municipalities, so it's certainly worth including them in the process if you're pricing for these machines. And then, of course, our oaa.virginia.gov. I have forgotten, ignored a ton of crap, but I'm sure that it'll come up in the questions. But I just really appreciate you guys for allowing us to talk a little bit about this pretty cool project.
Well, Jason, that's a great summary. I suspect we're going to have quite a few questions coming in. I'm reading through the chat right now, and we will include the chat dialogue when we post this information online, because there's quite a few folks that they're writing about similar efforts and others providing answers. But a question that's specific to the OAA, I think, is whether or not the funding has to be in alignment with the current administration's priorities, if I'm reading that correctly. And so I will tell you that for opioid settlement funds, these are not federally directed funds. These monies come from civil court orders where you've got companies, national level companies that have entered into settlement agreements with various states. And those settlement agreements are enacted in the form of a civil court order. In Virginia, it's a circuit court order from the Richmond Circuit Court that applies to the whole state. As far as priorities and how the money can be used, that's all in statute. And so the Virginia's governor's administration has had the opportunity to weigh in the development of the statutes. And we have a representative of the governor's administration on our board. Having said that, the OAA, I think, can continue on the road that we're on regardless of what's coming out of Washington, D.C., as long as what we're doing is still legal. And so the short answer is no. We don't shift with the winds coming out of Washington, D.C. So, for example, I heard recently that SAMHSA has published a document basically disavowing the term harm reduction, but we're still using that term here at the OAA and across Virginia. And I think there's some friction about whether or not federal funds can be used for syringe service programs. But again, we're going to continue to follow Virginia law on that. And so until the Virginia law changes, we're on a pretty clear path. So hopefully I answered that one in a way that's helpful for everybody. There was
Well,
a question.
if I can piggyback on that real quick, one of the things that we found to be extremely important in communicating any of the projects that we're doing is, to Tony's point, this isn't federal funds, this isn't state funds. This is using the profits from the companies who caused this to happen in the first place. We had people ask, like, oh, and it felt kind of crappy. It was probably intended kind of crappy, but like, oh, so we're going to give addicts free medication. What about, people with diabetes? And I try and say with as much kindness as I can muster, if we end up with a settlement from Nestle and Domino and the Mars company because of a diabetes epidemic, then that would be one of the first things I would suggest. But it's not. So it's not general fund money. It can't be used for anything other than this. And so I think it's really important to convey that to people that, we're not diverting funds from anything to do this work.
Yeah, that's a great point. Changing gears just a little bit, a question that came out is, I know that you cannot dispense prescription items through the machine, but do you have anything in the machine that allows people to know how to get items such as Clexata?
Short answer, no. But we are working on another OAA project, is a searchable database of resources throughout the greater Richmond area. So as soon as that is up and out, then that's going to be prominently posted on the machines themselves so that people can access all of that information. But no, we really don't have anything like that. And I think that there's some interesting conversations happening around, could there be prescription, if there's no street value. The reason I bring this up is because there are some ideas around harm reduction around Hep C and HIV, that could these machines be used in a way to benefit that population, not through these funds, but just a separate project. And I know that a harm reduction organization in DC actually does they do syringe services through the vending machine. Anybody who's registered for their exchange program has a specific ID number. And so they can only access those items with that ID number. We can't legally put syringes in the machines, and that's fine. But knowing that the ability to do that is there, I think it does open up the conversations about, could we do things that were prescription oriented if there wasn't a street value to whatever that prescription was.
Thank you for that answer. Kind of a little bit in a different direction. Question about the budget. You had mentioned the $147,000, and was that the total for the 3 machines?
That was total for everything that we thought we were going to spend, and we actually ended up spending less. So the machines are a little bit over 11,000 bucks each, um, which seems really expensive for a vending machine, but I mean, it's just what things cost, I guess, these days. So only about 35 grand of that was in the machines. So much of it was with inventory in the machines. Um, and then other things to think about in the budgeting process. If you're going to do this, do you have an in-house graphic design team? Because if not, then that's something you're going to need to account for in your budget as well. Um, Stocking inventory, right? Is there somebody that's inside of your portfolio that's something that they could manage? But I think it's really important to go through all of those things. What are you putting in the machines? The machines. How are you getting stuff back into the machines? And then just break that down. Like, internally, you'll want that information, but of course, the team at OAA is going to want to see that as well. So,
Lots of comments in the chat about ways to distribute naloxone separate from the vending machine discussion. And we have had some of our colleagues from Virginia Department of Health do webinars on the Abatement Academy in the past about the Virginia Department of Health's naloxone distribution program. And so I know Carolyn Lemire is on the call. Carolyn, if you don't mind making sure that you include maybe a link for anyone who's interested to get more information, maybe type that into the chat. Rather than try to read all of those, there's some great information that Carolyn and her team can provide about naloxone distribution. But I do want to ask for anyone that's attending that has specific questions about putting forward vending machines in your community, any specific questions, any ideas, please feel free to type those into the chat and we can address those. Jason, I'm also getting quite a few compliments through the chat about what you're doing, and the information is helpful.
oh, thanks so much. Yeah, it really is an incredible opportunity to do real life-saving work every day. It's pretty incredible.
And Jason, is it okay if I put your email
Please.
into the chat?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And I'm not seeing any other questions coming in about the machines. But at this time, I'll let anybody that found this to be helpful to click one of the little emojis or to type something in so that Jason can get some feedback. He did tell me before the session started that he's dressed today for outreach. So I told him that I'll be the business and he can be the party, and based on the way we're dressed.
Yeah, so just shameless plug here. I don't know if you guys can see, but this is our Richmond Inclusive Recovery Cities logo, which is an awesome project that we were able to do. So we're the first recognized inclusive recovery city in North America. Pretty rad. And it's really just a stigma reduction, initiative, really to try and better incorporate the recovery community and the community at large. So yeah, we're out with VCU's Collegiate Recovery Program, Rams in Recovery, ourselves, another outreach, an amazing public health organization here called Daily Planet. And we're just hanging out in Monroe Park, distributing naloxone and just spreading the word. So it's our sort of overdose awareness day outreach. So thanks for bringing it up, Tony.
Hey, a question that I think I missed is can you just confirm how many machines are currently deployed by the city?
Currently deployed and functioning is 1. That is going to be, and it'll be 3 within the next 2 weeks. So
Great job. So I would just encourage everybody, the first step of a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. And that's exactly what Jason and his colleagues and the folks with the Richmond team have done here. This was something completely new. They didn't have a blueprint to follow, so they just got busy. And I think I know that there's universities, there's cities, there's counties, there's community service boards that are very interested in putting naloxone distribution out in the form of vending machines. And so now you've got somebody that's kind of been down that road and can help you with advice. We put Jason's contact information in the chat, and he might get angry at me for this, but please feel free to reach out to him for any tips and tricks, and
Please
we can all
do.
help each other be successful.
Absolutely. Yeah, and seriously, please don't hesitate to reach out. I think sharing of ideas is pretty important. And there are things we're doing here that may not work in other parts of the Commonwealth. There are things that we're not doing here that you guys are doing in other parts of the Commonwealth that we could absolutely learn from. So please, yeah, don't be shy or hesitate to reach out.
And just one last final announcement to everybody as a reminder, we will post this PowerPoint presentation, the chat log, and a link to the video on the OAA website as soon as we have everything edited. Usually takes a day or two, and we'll be sending out an email to everyone who registered, whether you're on live or not, that provides those links. And so with that, I'm going to offer one last word of thanks to Jason for your time. Best of luck with the distribution effort this afternoon. And
Thank
everybody
you.
else, I think a lot of people are taking the day off tomorrow because of the Labor Day holiday coming up. Hope everybody has a safe, fun time. Remember to carry naloxone with you wherever you're going. All
That's
right.
right.
Thanks a lot. Everybody have a great day.